I will demonstrate you how to tie a float rig which can be used for big river fish like big barbel, big chub, maybe massive bream, sometimes carp as well.
Exactly the same spot.
And this is the bad boy. So I will go in detail what main lines I use, what floats and when, what sleeves, what weights, what swivels, what leaders, and so on. So it will be a good and very useful one. Please make sure you stick around. I will begin by explaining what components I will use to tie this rig. First of all, the float of choice for a given situation. In this case, or for this demonstration, I will use one of them Corum Specie stick floats. Then Olivet to match the float and to match the situation. Good quality fluorocarbon line. I would advise to use a line which is of a diameter of 0.30. Decent quality swivel. I would say size 10 to size 12 will be perfect. Then some split shots, again according to the situation. For this demonstration I will use a decent size ones, which are BBs. Then some float stops, but those are not really necessary. I will explain why a little bit later. And some silicone or latex sleeves to fasten the float onto the line. So those are all components, not including the hook link obviously and the hook, which will be needed to tie up this fantastic rig for big river fish. When it comes to the main line, I always use braided line. For my river float fishing, it gives me plenty of advantages. For example, it allows me to control my rig better, and it allows me to have my main line much thinner, and therefore my presentation is much better. Also, it's always like that when you hook a big fish, you will have more control if you are using braided line, because there will be no stretch in the line, and you will be able to land the fish not even easier but quicker as well. And also braided line does not sink at all, it floats. So for river work it's perfect, you won't find any better line. And when it comes to the diameter, basically in this case I have a little bit thicker one just for this demonstration, but when I go and do some real fishing in a real situation, I use this Tsurinoya line, just kinda newer version in 0.15, and that's more than enough for any barbel, big chub, bream, something else really, whatever you will be fishing. And in most cases for river fish, float fished fish, this diameter of 0.15 will be absolutely enough. It will be, or it will have probably about 10 kilos of strength or breaking strain as you call it. So yeah, but for this demonstration I will use a little bit thicker braided line, so you would be able to see a little bit better maybe what I'm doing. So I will grab a little bit of that line, and let's assume that this is my reel and this line is coming from my reel. So all I will do now, I will put my float onto the braided line. So for that I will use very big and just thick walled sleeve, which is made out of some silicone. This Corum float has a hole through the body, which makes it a little bit stronger, which is good to see. Okay, now it will be a little bit trickier. And also I will say this, that for these two sleeves I like to use pole elastic hollow one because it's super strong, and I don't like to use, you know, those kind of silicone sleeves which are kind of designed for or to be used on these kinds of floats. Those silicones are just not strong enough, but pole silicone is definitely stronger. So just now I will have a problem when it comes to putting these tubes onto the line because they have very small bore. For that you can use really like a carp needle or something, but I will just use some of a monofilament line which is relatively stiff. So I will just form a loop and transfer this little sleeve onto the line. As you can see, even thicker line goes very kinda not easy through that silicone tube. And as you can see now, I'm just putting my braided line through that loop, and I ended up with one sleeve on my braided line. And I will use two of these sleeves. This longer one will be even more difficult to get on the braided line, but let's see. As you can see, I have both those sleeves onto my braid line. Also, little tip, if you will be putting something what has very tiny bore onto the float, or float stem should I say, maybe wet the stem a little bit, then it will be a little bit easier to work with it. So as always, you don't want to put all the length of the bottom sleeve onto the stem. You want to leave it just like that to reduce the tangles, you know. Now it's kind of stiff and it will bounce back and it will never tangle. Okay, this one now may go a little bit up, just here. Perfect. Okay, as you can see, the float is attached onto the line. I will not forget to put this big one on as well, just to make sure that my float or my rig is super durable, you know. Perfect. You might say that this looks too thick. Really, I don't care about it too much. It actually helps, I believe, when I will be holding back. This little kind of edge will help me to control the float better. But again, it's not the purpose of the sleeve. The sleeve just helps to protect the float, even though in this case, as I say, I have a float with a hole. I would not really need that, but now my float is super durable. Okay, now when it comes to attaching Olivet onto the line, basically I will grab one which is, by the way, my float is 8 grams, and I will grab an Olivet which is 8 grams as well. I like those Drennan Olivets. They have weights engraved on every Olivet, and that's great. So yeah, now you can do or attach the Olivet kind of in two ways. Basically, if you are not too sure if you will want to use shots on your braided line, because you know you are just not that confident that you know your shots are very good quality and soft shots, then maybe you should consider using float stops. But again, I always use actually shots on my braided line just to secure the Olivet. But if you are using kind of shots which you are not so confident in, then maybe use a couple of float stops, you know. Then you will be 100% sure that those shots won't damage the braided line. And I would advise to use 2 float stops just here. Now, obviously, Olivet goes onto the line. Let's see if we can just thread it through, or I will need some help. Yeah, I will need some help because the braided line is, as I say, much softer. As my Olivet has tiny bore, I can't even use that thicker monofilament I was using. Therefore, you won't be able to see it, but I'm using about 0.25 fluorocarbon. Basically, it's thinner, but still relatively stiff, you know, so it should be easy job to get that braided line through the Olivet. Again, if you will be using some different, okay, let's put that braided line through the Olivet. Perfect. Okay, so see those two float stops, they are needed here. Some people let the Olivet slide freely. I don't like that, because if you think about it, when you will be playing like, I don't know, Big Barbel, for example, and when the fish will be constantly running and it will be bouncing that Olivet to the knot by the swivel all the time and weakening the knot. You don't want that. You want to have your Olivet fixed all the time. So yeah, let's attach this swivel now. For that you can use any knot you want really. I just will use simple like blood knot. Should do. Always moisten when you tie a real rig for a real situation and test it. Okay, that looks nice and strong. We'll leave probably a couple mils of braided line by the knot, just like that, and then I will slide my Olivet on those two float stops. So as you can see, my Olivet is fixed nicely. Everything is nice and neat, very, very delicate. So now my Olivet won't be moving and damaging my knot, you know. So if it would be loose, if you think about it, then it would be bouncing into the knot all the time. So you don't want that. You want to have your Olivet fixed. And I believe presentation wise, fixed Olivet for this rig is much, much better. Okay, let's move further. Now I will attach to this swivel, and you need that swivel here because if you imagine, often you will be using big baits with this rig, and big baits will, you know, twist or kind of produce lots of twist action onto your hook link and then onto your rig. And if you would not have the swivel here, your rig and hook link would get twisted really, really bad, especially in those, you know, fast waters when you will be using big baits. Therefore, swivel in this situation really is needed. You need to use it. Now to this swivel, I will attach about a meter of fluorocarbon. The diameter of that fluorocarbon should be about 0.30 or 0.25. Those are my go-to diameters when I'm fishing for big barbel, big chub, even in very, very snaggy situations. And as I say, about a meter of that fluorocarbon from the swivel to the hook link will be fine. I like to use this one from AliExpress. It's called Maulos, but as fluorocarbon is clear, you would not be able to see what I'm doing. Therefore, I will switch this fluorocarbon to dark monofilament line, so you would be able to see better what I'm doing. But again, in a real situation when you will be tying your own rig, make sure that you are using some kind of fluorocarbon. Okay, let's grab about a meter of the thick and black monofilament line. That will do. When you are dealing with stiff lines, you always want to give a good pull, you know, to make sure that the line is more or less straight. Okay, that will do. Okay, now it's basic really. I will attach this line to my swivel. For this I will use Griner or uni knot, because I believe it's a neat knot with a correct direction of the tag when it leaves the knot. Okay, one more. That's it. Again, don't forget to wet the knot before pulling it tight. Okay. Nice and strong. We leave probably, I don't know, 1 millimeter tag in here. Now, I always like to overshot my river eggs depending on the situation. Therefore, I will put a couple of BB shots just by the swivel. Again, if I would not be using those two float stops, I could put those shots just to lock my Olivet as well. And in real situations, this is what I'm doing actually. But again, as I say, if you don't know how hard the lead is in those shots you will be using, don't take a risk. Put them onto a thick fluorocarbon, and then you will be sure that your main line is as strong as it can be. Okay, now I will put another one just to make sure that I'm overshooting my float a little bit. Obviously, overshooting the float helps with holding it back, when the float will be taking your rig, and then you can kind of hold it back a little bit and it won't go out of the water that much. But again, this is according to the situation. Couple BBs, for my taste in most situations, it's absolutely fine. Okay, now at the end of that thick fluorocarbon, I will tie a tiny little loop. And for that I will use Ringer's loop tire. Fantastic little tool to make consistent loops. Perfect. Make sure that it's nice and tight. We'll trim off the tag end, leaving probably 1 millimeter. Just like that. And now, more or less in the middle between the loop and the group of the shots, I will put one more shot just to have that finesse type presentation where I will be able to have my bait fall, but still it won't be like a free fall. I will have some control when it comes to the shots and seeing the bites. This little shot just might help me to see some bites. And that's it, more or less. So now I will grab a hook link and put it onto the rig using loop to loop technique. Right, I have my hook link here. You won't be able to see it because it's clear, but it's here. So loop to loop, nice and simple and delicate. And when it comes to the diameter of the hook link, when I'm fishing for barbel, big barbel, like 5 kilo barbel and bigger, then I would use about 0.20 to 0.23 millimeters diameter hook link, fluorocarbon as well. And my favorite hook for big fish, in most situations when I'm using bigger baits like mussels and prawns, I'm using Guru extra strong carp hooks in size 10, 12, something like that. Again, depending on the bait and the situation. But yeah, all the rig is now complete. One more little trick. Basically, as I like to use bright lines for my main line, bright braid lines, you might think that this line might spook like big chub or barbel or whatever, even though probably it won't be the case. But just to be sure, I always, or most of the time, what I do, I paint probably about a meter of that braided line, starting from the Olivet. So I will just take the marker and will paint it, as I say, meter, meter and a half, maybe something like that, just to make sure that I don't have anything bright close to my to my bait or my hook link. So everything now is concealed and it It's ready to go. But it's all bit from me for today. I hope you'll find this video useful. Please try out the rig when you are targeting big river specimens. I'm certain you will catch quite a few of them, given that you've chosen a right spot and also you have a right bait on the end of your rig. But that's it. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.